Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Monday, November 10th, 2025, and today we are going to be talking about the state of Virginia and the state's congressional boundaries going into the 2026 midterm elections as Democrats win their election just roughly a week ago across the state, ushering in what we are likely going to see as total domination for the Democratic Party as they get through this state and they look to redraw their congressional boundaries ahead of the upcoming midterm elections. For a bit of context, if you're new to what's happening in the state of Virginia, what might interest you is that the Democrats in this state have done a very special maneuver to allow them to have a brand new congressional map set to take place in about a year's time. And the way in which they had to do this, California's Proposition 50 served as the blueprint for this. But in the state of Virginia, the Constitution is explicit. If you want to change a constitutional amendment, which the Virginia Constitution was passed in 2020, including a provision surrounding independent redistricting commissions that were passed overwhelmingly by the voters 5 years later, it's now being called into question. The standard way to go about doing a process like this is that two versions of a state legislature must pass the initiative to put forth a vote to the populace in Virginia that would ultimately declare that if the first legislature, the state House of Delegates, passes the vote, then an election must take place, and then another vote must take place after said election. So essentially prohibits, a last-minute change right before an election to save a political party. Well, in the state of Virginia, due to a bit of a mishap on the side of the governor's office, Democrats explored a special session that had remained open since the springtime. And what they did a week before the election was vote on the decision to have voters make that choice surrounding a new commission and a new way of redrawing their congressional districts. Then the election happened on Tuesday, which Democrats not only won, but expanded their majority in the state of Virginia to a point that they gained 13 seats across the state, enough so that they have a near supermajority in the state of Virginia. And so, of course, the expectation is that they will pass it again, but then the voters will make a decision as to whether or not they support the House of Delegates' decision here to redraw the congressional boundaries. But after the election results on Tuesday, it's a lot more apparent here, at least to me and I think many others across the state, that chances are the congressional boundaries here are going to be quite good for the Democrats, and the odds at which voters actually make that conscious decision to redraw the state's boundaries have skyrocketed. After California's Proposition 50, and not to mention the exceptionally strong results for Democrats in Virginia, the story is starting to write itself. In the last presidential election, Kamala Harris won Virginia by a margin here of roughly 6 percentage points. It's by no means deafening, and it's certainly not something that Democrats were thrilled about, but it did suggest that the majority of voters in Virginia are aligned with the Democratic Party and in opposition to that of Donald Trump. But in the 2025 elections, Democrats took it a step further. They won Virginia by an astronomical amount, winning it by 15 points across the state, and it showed that the appetite against Donald Trump is so palpable that it is displaying election results Democrats have not seen for generations. And so thinking about what that could mean in a hypothetical 2026 vote that would have to take place in a few months' time is that Democrats are likely going to pass that Virginia proposition, not just because of the results that we saw in 2025, but arguably in part two, the results that we saw in 2024. And you might be thinking, okay, how did California's Proposition 50 compare to that of Kamala Harris's 20-point whopping margin in the state of California? Well, we can go ahead and take a look. With 80% of votes counted, which again is its own problem with California, but Proposition 50 so far has shown that the yes vote is passing by 28 percentage points across the state. Keep in mind, it was the same state that a decade and a half ago voted to pass a proposition that would outlaw gerrymandering at every point across the state, would implement that IRC that is now known to be, one that Democrats, sure, have benefited from, but also largely benefited from because they run better candidates. I hate to say it, the California GOP has not sent their best. They have not done well in elections where they arguably could have been, if the election results were just 5 points further to the right, they would have roughly a third of the state's entire delegation. But now, after Prop 50 passes, chances are that their representation is going to go down from 9 seats down to 4. And thinking about, just what the results show in California is that the outperformance for Democrats in Prop 50 is about 8 points to the left of what it was in 2024. And looking at the governor results, well, it's about 9 points to the left from where it was. Wow, this actually just went up as we were talking about it. Now it's a 14.8% margin, I believe, as the difference between the two. So certainly phenomenal for the Democrats, no matter how you cut it. It was 14.6, I think, just a few minutes ago when we were looking at the topic, or maybe it was yesterday. But in either case, Virginia outrunning Kamala Harris by 9 points, and California doing so by 8 points, and New Jersey doing so by 8 points, is something that is extraordinarily impressive, one, for the Democratic Party, but also quite indicative of what a repeat Prop 50, in this case in Virginia, would be whatever they name it then, what it would mean for the Democratic Party in that state. And what it would ultimately resort to is that Democrats would likely win that vote in Virginia, and with the backing of Spanberger, who many people thought might be in opposition, right? She, 5 years ago, was one of the biggest proponents of Virginia's independent commission, which, again, Democrats were operating under this assumption that other states might follow suit, that red states would work alongside them to ensure that the process is fair, that it needed to change fundamentally. But obviously, Republicans were never game. They were never going to be willing to coordinate with the Democrats and nerf their own ability at retaining majorities, even when democracy would suggest they otherwise shouldn't have said majorities. And so I think Abigail Spanberger, like many Democrats, despite her, centrist reputation, absolutely is of the opinion that when it is time to fight fire with fire, Democrats must meet that moment. And I think that for a lot of Democrats, they were initially apprehensive when Gavin Newsom first floated Prop 50. I mean, you can even see it in the data. When it first came out, we saw that the first ever poll released from a mainstream pollster, Emerson, had just 33% of residents in support. Then Politico came out with a poll showing that, 28%, 28% more voters were in opposition rather than in support, and yet it is the identical outcome, not identical, exact opposite outcome across the state of California, and that's because a lot of these voters, believe it or not, probably did change their minds. That when it was first being proposed, they said, I don't know, why are we doing what the Republicans are doing? But now, that's all they want to do. That's why so many Democrats are in support of, yes, keep the government shut down. That's why so many Democrats are in support, yes, gerrymander my state. Go to Virginia, a state that Donald Trump got 46% of the vote in. And you know what the Senate pro tempore is saying on the Democratic side? One of the longest serving Democratic leaders in the state of Virginia, Senator Louise Lucas, who ran for Congress herself in 2001, was going to run again in 2002 after losing by just 4 points. And get this, the Republicans drew out her district to make it solid red. They took a swing district that was won by just a few points in the special election in 2001. And they said, we want this district to be safe for the GOP. And they told her essentially on the floor when they redrew the maps, they were vindictive with it and told her she will never walk the halls of Congress. And so now that we're on the flip side, 20 years later, over that, she has been very public and brazen in her estimation that the Democrats are going to be drawing a 10-1 map. She has said this constantly. We talked about this before, too, and Louise Lucas is the Democrat who tipped us off earlier on that they were going to get the votes for redistricting. We didn't think it would happen. It was an 11th hour, announcement that they even had the ability to do. So we thought, okay, maybe by 2028, but even then, it would take Democrats doing well in 2025 for you to get enough votes. Nope. 1-seat majorities in the state Senate and in the state House of Delegates, and yet it got through on a party line vote. And she is now saying, not only are we going to redraw the maps, but we are going to give Republicans one singular seat in a state that in the last election, they got 48% of the vote, meaning that the map is going to look a lot like this by the end of it. Blue, 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 and blue. 10 seats for the Democrats and just 1 for the GOP. What that means on the national level already gives Democrats that upper hand. Had that been the case going into 2024, Hakeem Jeffries would be Speaker of the House today. And so really thinking about, what this shows and really thinking about, what the Democrats are doing in the state of Virginia and how they are, deciding to move forward with this new congressional redraw, it is going to be successful. And I think that California's Prop 50 was a great example of that, especially in these lower propensity elections. Yeah, Democrats are going to get this vote through. And so it will ultimately be a question of are Democrats merciful towards Republicans in the way they redraw the maps? Are they going to give them 2 or 3 seats and gain 1 or 2 seats on the Democratic side rather than go for a 10-1 map? And while that might be at the discretion of the state legislature, it does certainly help the Democrats that the Democrat leading the helm here is going for the most exceptionally powerful map for the Democratic Party that they will see in recent memory. Because when the shoe is on the other foot, and Republicans have had historically the ability to do this to Democrats, they certainly have taken advantage of it. In 2014, Democrats won just 3 seats in the state of Virginia, compared to 8 for the GOP. But get this, Republicans have not won Virginia on a statewide level for president since 2004. And so the sheer idea that this map was ever going to be fair, or that it was one that should have been implemented to this degree, this map right here in 2012 is the House map when Barack Obama won Virginia. 4 years later, this is the one when Hillary Clinton won the state of Virginia and her running mate came from the state. And 4 years after that, the Democrats came into the majority, but not easily. It required a necessary redraw and one that made it so the map was slightly more palatable to the Democratic Party. But if the results had looked different, Republicans were within 5 points in Virginia's second, 2 points with Abigail Spanberger, 13 points with Wexton here. That one probably would have held on. But think about it. Knock off 2 districts from the Democrats, and they're down to a minority. The point is that Republicans absolutely have taken advantage of excessive maps in favor of their party because they have done so constantly. In Missouri, Democrats are down to just 1 seat after the new redraw. In Tennessee, they drew out one of the 2 Democratic districts in the state. And with the VRA, Republicans are gearing up to axe every single Democratic seat in Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, South Carolina, and the list goes on and on. And that matters. The state of Virginia might be showing a pretty egregious gerrymander. But isn't that kind of the point for the Democratic Party? That they are giving Republicans a taste of their own medicine. And whether you agree with it or not, it does not change the reality that after voters get this to the ballot box in Virginia, that the odds at which it passes are likely 80-20 at start and probably 95-5 by Election Day, just as it stood to be with California's Proposition 50. And barring a substantial enough change in terms of sentiment from House of Delegates members, barring a change in composition in the Virginia State Senate, the Democrats are set to redraw the second state that they are looking to do across the country. Not Illinois, not Maryland, but instead the state of Virginia. And it looks like Democrats, at least in this state, Virginia is for lovers, in this state, are growing a spine and pushing back against Donald Trump, who is their neighbor over in Washington, D.C., and telling him that this is the way that they are going to go, and that ultimately is their decision. Because Prop 50 was agreed upon by the voters, and Virginia will give the voters the opportunity to vote as well. But given what the margins looked like on Tuesday, given how the race developed, and not just the governor's race, but even the lieutenant governor's race, even the attorney general's race, no matter how you cut it, every single Democrat statewide in Virginia outperformed relative to Kamala Harris. And every single statewide Democrat in Virginia, fast forward to an election on a new congressional map, would have helped usher in a Democratic victory across the finish line. Because even in California, when there was not a coinciding governor's race, a coinciding referendum, and get this too, the thing about Virginia, which we'll talk about once it's officially mainstream, but Democrats are set to put forth an abortion referendum coinciding with the new map referendum. And if it was already not going to pass, it certainly will now, and we'll talk about that at a later date. But as it stands today, an exceptionally good sign on Tuesday's election for what Democrats are likely to see over the coming months in the state of Virginia with their new map redraw. And what the results showed was absolutely a push on the side of the Democrats to fight back against Trump. And with a brand new congressional map, it only further helps their ability to do just that, which is seemingly the will of the voters in the state of Virginia. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video for you to watch, and then a playlist for my 2026 House election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.